I can still feel the weight of that morning air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and wild tobacco, as if time itself had paused over those Kansas cornfields in the summer of 1953. I'm a man who's seen more dawns than most, and yet it's that one sunrise I can't shake. I remember the way the lights slipped through the slats of our porch, casting stripes across my mother's silent form, her eyes fixed on nothing at all. It was then I first understood that sometimes the loudest voices are the ones that don't speak. I've carried that hush with me for 70 years, tucked between the pages of my worn-out journal, the one with the fraying cover and the faded floral embossed on its front. That book holds every whispered insult, every cold shoulder, every sharp intake of breath when I tried to cry and was told tears were for the weak. I'm not here to teach you anything. Hell, I'm not even sure I learned a lesson worth passing on, but I am here to share what keeps me awake when the wind rattles the window frames and the past comes knocking. It's a quiet confession, this story of mine, without fanfare or flourish, just the plain truth, like a nail in the board, steady and unyielding. You might think that an old man's memories would soften with time, but I found the opposite. Some scars only deepen, like rivers carving canyons in the rock. And if you've made it this far, settled in with me beneath these twilight skies, maybe consider giving that like button a tap, or drop a comment down below to let me know you're listening. And if you're new around here, a little subscribe goes a long way toward keeping these memories alive. Not because I crave attention, but because every story deserves a witness. So here's what's been gnawing at me. How is it that the people who were supposed to protect you became the ones who taught you you were worth nothing? That question has haunted my every step, from those creaky farmhouse floors to the echoing hospital hallways where I visited my own children decades later. I've tried to bury these recollections beneath new routines, raising grandkids, fixing leaky faucets, praising the dog for doing nothing more than wagging its tail. But the silence between my thoughts remains stubbornly filled with their voices. This isn't a tale of triumph, mind you. There's no dramatic reveal where I stand triumphant, no triumphant orchestral swell. It's a story of survival and of memory, a memory stronger than any pain they thought could break me. It's why, even now, I write these words by the dim glow of a bedside lamp, to remind myself that though they believed I would forget, their actions are etched into me like initials carved into the bark of an old oak. And so, as we step into this journey together, know that what follows isn't pretty. It's honest, it's raw, and it's been waiting in the shadows of my heart for too long to stay silent any longer. I was no more than 10 when the world I knew took shape around a weathered farmhouse at the edge of those endless Kansas fields, the kind of place where mornings tasted of dew on corn leaves and the distant hum of tractors sounded like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Back then, I believed the sun rose just for me, that each golden ray promised a day full of possibility. I'd wake before dawn, rub the sleep from my eyes, and press my nose against the cold window pane in our small kitchen, watching my pa step out onto the porch in his worn boots, his silhouette sharp against the pale sky. Ma would stand behind him, her shoulders stooped just so, hands folded as if in quiet prayer, though not a word ever passed between them before the first light broke. My sister, older by 2 years, would already be at the stove, humming some tune she'd picked up on the radio, her laughter warm and careless. She had the gift, it seemed, of making everything feel lighter. And me? I was the boy who tiptoed through those rooms, thinking myself almost invisible, carrying a small leather-bound notebook that held my biggest dream, to someday wander beyond those fields and discover a world kinder than the one I saw at home. Wife moved to the rhythm of chores and Sunday potlucks down at the church hall, where neighbors would pile mashed potatoes into paper plates and kids would chase fireflies until dusk. My pa taught me to mend fences with wire and patience, to value hard work above all else. And he made sure I understood early that kindness was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. Still, I believed it with all my heart. I believed that good deeds were seeds you scattered in the wind, and that someday they'd grow into forests of grace. My ma rarely spoke, but her eyes told stories of a love she'd buried beneath courtesy and duty, and sometimes, late at night, I'd hear her soft sobs through the thin walls, wondering if she regretted the silence she chose. My uncle, smooth-tongued and quick with a joke, would arrive on weekends, suitcase in hand, joking that he'd come to save me from this backwater nothingness, but I saw the way he'd shut the door when he pulled me close, the way his grin sharpened when he told me I'd never measure up, and my sister's bright smiles, the ones that felt like sunbursts, cut me deeper than any cruel word. She was the chosen one, the one they cheered on, while I was the one shushed and scolded for breathing too loud, for asking too many questions, for daring to hope. Yet in that world, I had my refuge, a lean-to in the back pasture, built from fallen boards and wildflowers, where I sketched the shapes of clouds drifting above the weed and wrote letters to myself about everything I dreamed of becoming: a teacher, a traveler, a man who would speak words of comfort instead of condemnation. I'd imagine reading those letters to an audience who'd lean in close, wiping tears from the corners of their eyes, the same way I wiped my own tears when they fell. I believed then, oddly, stubbornly, that people returned, that forgiveness was a bridge you could cross, and that love, if you waited long enough, would find its way back through even the coldest walls. Childhood, for me, was that fragile balance between hope and heartbreak, between Sunday hymns echoing in sunlit pews and the hush of the water pump when I dared to cry. In those days, every sunset promised a new beginning, and every morning whispered a quiet refrain. Keep believing, boy, keep believing. I held on to that refrain like a talisman, tucking it inside me whenever the hurt felt too heavy, convinced that my dreams of kindness and belonging were more than childish wishes. They were the very thing that would carry me through the years to come. There came a morning when everything I thought I knew about my life shifted, though I didn't realize it until weeks later, when I found that worn slip of paper folded in my pocket. It began on the edge of summer, just after school let out, and the days felt as endless as the corn rows behind our farmhouse. I was 12 then, the same age my sister had been when she first learned to ride her bike without training wheels, her laugh echoing down the dusty lane while I cheered her on and her pa clapped from the porch. That afternoon, I wandered toward Mrs. Callahan's place, the old schoolteacher who'd moved in next door, her weathered clapboard house set back under a pair of gnarled oaks, and there I saw her for the first time, a girl with hair that caught the sun like copper, kneeling by a pot of marigolds in her front yard. She looked up, startled, as I cleared my throat, and her eyes were two steady sparks of curiosity. "Hi," I said, my voice thinner than I expected, and she smiled, so softly it felt like the first raindrop on parched ground. She told me her name was Elsie, that she'd come to live with her grandmother while her pa worked in Wichita, and how she loved to paint flowers because they reminded her of home. In that moment, I felt my heart race in a way I'd only heard about in hymns and old love songs drifting from our radio on Sunday mornings. I didn't know whether it was excitement or fear, maybe both, but I tucked my hands into my pockets and brushed my thumb against the edge of a folded note I'd stolen from my sister's desk, where she'd been writing about her summer dance recital in fancy script I'd never dared imagine for myself. Elsie asked me about my notebook, the one I carried everywhere, and when I showed her the scribbled sketches of clouds and half-finished stories, her eyes lit up like she was reading secret code meant only for me. She told me that words had power, that they could mend a broken fence or heal a lonely heart, and though I'd heard the word power all my life, from my pa insisting strength was the only currency that mattered, I'd never thought it applied to something as fragile as ink on paper. That afternoon, we sat on her creaky porch swing, passing her grandmother's lemonade back and forth as the cicadas droned overhead, and she read me a line she'd written in her journal: "We are more than the shadows cast by those who came before us." I stared at her, feeling a warmth I couldn't name, and when I tried to speak, my throat tightened, so I just nodded and let the words sink in. I wanted to ask her to say that again, but instead I slipped away, feeling as if I'd stumbled into a new world without realizing there was a gate. Over the next weeks, meeting her became the highlight of the day. Her lessons on mixing colors, her tales of city streets she dreamed of walking one day, her gentle assurances that I was more than my pa's scolding words or my ma's quiet tears. I found myself scribbling down anything she said, hiding the pages beneath my mattress so no one else would find them. And then, one evening, I found that note in my pocket, the one I'd forgotten from the day I wandered over, and unfolded it to find a short message in her looping hand. "You matter, even when no one else says it." My chest tightened and a single tear slipped down my cheek, because no one had ever said that to me before, not out loud, not without expecting me to earn it first. That simple message became the spark that lit a new flame inside me, a stubborn belief that I might be good enough for something beyond what my family expected. In the weeks that followed, I carried her words like a talisman, brushing aside the jibes from my uncle and the empty silences at dinner, imagining that someday I'd muster the courage to believe her truth over their lies. And though the world around me didn't change overnight, my pa still found reason to scold, my ma still held her breath in the kitchen, my sister still shone like the golden child, I felt a shift inside, as if a door I'd never dared open was now cracked wide enough for hope to slip through. It was that moment, meeting Elsie tending her flowers, hearing her say that one simple sentence, that set a new current running through my life, when I wouldn't understand fully until decades later, when I read those same words back to myself on a faded page, wondering how something so small could carry the weight of an entire lifetime. I still remember the day the world I'd begun to trust cracked open again. It was late August, the cicadas singing their final summer dirge, when Ma's quiet steps woke me before dawn. I crept into the kitchen and found her staring at the empty chair where Pa always ate, her shoulders trembling like the last leaf on a dying tree. I didn't understand at first. How could she lose something she never spoke of? But when my uncle appeared, eyes red and voice low, I realized Pa was gone. They said it was a heart attack, sudden as lightning on a clear day, and just like that, the man who'd been my judge and jailer lay still beneath the sheets I'd watched him grimace into night after night. In the weeks that followed, our farmhouse felt too small for all the silence. My sister slipped away into her books, tears hidden behind dog-eared pages, while my uncle took over every chore with a clipped efficiency that left me out in the fields, unsure where I belonged. My mom moved like a ghost down the hall, her quiet presence more haunting than any harsh word. I found my lean-to, my refuge, splintered boards and wilted wildflowers trampled underfoot, as if the ground itself had rejected my dreams. And then came the note from Elsie. She and her granny were moving back to Wichita. I held that paper like a lifeline, rereading her promise that she'd return next summer, and I believed it until the school bus pulled away, taking every scrap of color with it. At home, my uncle's voice sharpened. "You're too old for daydreams," he snapped when I lingered by the fence, watching where her porch once stood. "This farm needs real hands, not fairy tales." His words struck harder than any blow, and I felt a rage I'd never dared name, rage at losing Pa, at Ma's broken silence, at my sister's quiet tears, and at Elsie's absence, which burned a hole through every hopeful page in my notebook. I wanted to scream that I wasn't a child any longer, that my heart could hurt as much as theirs, but instead I swallowed those words and trudged back to the barn. Inside, the smell of hay and horses was supposed to comfort me, but all I felt was hollowed out. Fear crept in like a cold draft under the door. Fear that without Pa's stern voice I'd be nothing. Fear that Ma would slip away entirely. Fear that my own voice, soft and tremulous, would never find the courage to speak true again. Days blended into one another, milking cows at dawn, hauling water at noon, sitting at the dinner table while my uncle carved the meat and my sister nibbled at potatoes, all of us pretending this was normal. But normal had died with Pa. One evening, I found Ma in the pantry, her hands trembling over a loaf of bread. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the woman behind the silence, her eyes pleading, as if asking me to save her from the same emptiness I felt inside. I reached out, touched her arm, and felt her shudder. Our shared grief created a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. I realized then that survival wouldn't come from burying feelings, but from naming them, however quietly. Yet, the world around me resisted. My uncle warned against weakness, my sister retreated deeper into stories she wrote only for herself, and Ma slipped back behind her walls. Inside me, doubt took root. Was I strong enough to carry this pain? Or would I break like the fragile lean-to in the pasture? Shame followed, convincing me the shadows in my heart were my own fault, that perhaps Pa's harsh words were deserved, that my longing for kindness was foolish. And in that season of loss, I learned the hardest lesson of all. Grief doesn't arrive with a single knock. It sneaks in through open windows, through empty chairs, through the absence of a summer friendship. It teaches you to fear your own feelings, to doubt your own worth, and to question whether anyone would notice if you simply vanished. But somewhere in that darkness, a tiny spark persisted, an echo of Elsie's promise, a flicker of my childhood faith that kindness could return. It was enough to keep me moving, even when every step felt like trudging through mud. And so I pressed on, carrying my doubts like stones in my pocket, learning that the first true test of survival isn't heroic conquest, but the quiet choice to feel the pain and keep living anyway. I remember the moment the world as I'd known it stopped altogether. It was late afternoon, the sun hanging low over the cornrows, setting everything aglow in that golden haze that makes you think magic is possible. I was 16, older now, taller than Pa ever stood, with my own shoulders broad enough to carry more than I ever thought I could. I'd been sneaking out at night, meeting Elsie behind the old windmill down by Miller's Creek, passing her the pages of my journal filled with stories of what I wished my life could be. I thought I was careful. I didn't think anyone noticed the faint glow of the kerosene lantern or the soft thud of booted feet against the earth. But that evening, I returned home to find the front door cracked open, hinges dripping rust, and inside, chaos. Chairs lay overturned, the mantel clock lay shattered, glass fragments glinting like tears across the wooden floor. My heart pounded so loud I thought the barn doors might burst open from the thunder in my chest. I called for Ma, but only found her trembling by the pantry, hands shaking so hard she could barely hold the empty pitcher. And there, on the kitchen table, lay my notebook, its cover torn, pages scattered, ink bleeding into the grains of the wood like spilled blood. I remember kneeling, picking up a page, fingertips brushing into the words Elsie had written, "You are a light no darkness can hide." But the black ink had been smeared, the edges burnt, the promise of her handwriting reduced to a smear I could barely read. And then my uncle appeared in the doorway, his face as cold and hard as the plow blades we used in spring. He said nothing. Instead, he reached down, grabbed what remained of my journal, and hurled it across the room like it was nothing more than rubbish. I saw the pages flutter, landing like wounded birds on the floor, and in that moment, something inside me broke. Time slowed, each heartbeat like a hammer blow, each breath a thunderclap. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the line they crossed. Rage washed through me hotter than the summer sun, blending with shame until I could no longer tell one from the other. I stood, voice trembling, and asked my uncle why he'd done it. He looked at me with eyes I'd never seen before, and said, "Dreams are for fools. You're nothing but a burden." Then he turned, stepping over the wreckage of my hopes, leaving me alone in that silent house with the weight of his words crushing me. In that stillness, I realized what I'd lost, not just a handful of pages, but my belief that I mattered, that kindness had a place in a world ruled by hard fists and harder words. I dropped to my knees, gathering the fragments of paper, but the pages crumbled beneath my fingers, the words slipping away like water through a sieve. I tried to recite them, her promise of light, but my mouth tasted of dust and regret. My vision blurred, and I heard Ma's quiet sob behind me, felt her small frame press against mine as if she thought she could hold the broken pieces together. But I shook her off, terror clawing at my throat. If I let her see me cry, maybe the last shreds of dignity would vanish. Instead, I fled into the dusk, sprinting down the dirt lane toward the creek, the world closing in around me as if the very air had turned to stone. I fell to my knees on the creek bank, water lapping at my boots, and screamed until my voice gave out, until the echoes of my grief were carried off by the wind. In that moment of utter despair, I understood the true cost of silence and betrayal, that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones you're meant to trust. I tasted bitterness on my tongue and vowed, even then, that I would not let their cruelty define me. My tears mixed with the creek water, and I made a promise to the night sky. I will rise from this ruin. I will remember who I am. But I also knew, deep in my bones, that the boy I'd been, hopeful, gentle, dreaming, had died on that scorched kitchen floor, and in his place stood someone forged by fire and heartbreak. That was the turning point, the day I learned that survival sometimes demands a surrender to the pain, so you can build something new from its ashes. I remember the days that followed like a long, silent winter, when the world outside my window moved on without me, and every sunrise felt like a question I couldn't answer. After that night by the creek, I returned home to boarded-up dreams and the echo of voices that no longer believed in me. I wandered through the rooms of that old farmhouse as if I were a stranger, tracing the gouges in the wooden floor where chairs had fallen, running my fingers along the cracked windowsill where sunlight once danced, now nothing more than a pale smear. My sister spoke only in hushed tones, the laughter I knew so well replaced by a fragile quiet that sounded like regret, and my ma carried on her shoulders a grief so vast I can see it bending her spine. My uncle was distant, working the fields until dusk and refusing to meet my eyes, as though he feared the debts he'd incurred against my heart. I tried to pick up the pieces of my notebook, those charred, waterlogged pages, and paste them back together, but the words slipped away like smoke through my fingers, and I realized that some parts of us are gone for good once they break. In that emptiness, I found a hollow I'd never known before, a space where hope had been but bore no fruit. I tried to pray, though I wasn't sure to whom, fumbling through the lines of old hymns Ma had sung softly at night, but even faith felt distant, more a habit than a refuge. The lean-to in the pasture lay abandoned, its roof sagging under the weight of winter frost, and I quit visiting it, afraid that the ghosts of what once was might pull me down into their shadows. Each morning, I rose with the chickens, performed my chores in a kind of trance, milking cows, stacking hay, mending fences, but my hands moved without purpose, as though they belonged to someone else. I caught myself staring at the vast fields, imagining them endless seas that swallowed every footstep, and wondered if I might wander until I faded into those rows of corn. My dreams at night were silent, no word from Elsie, no bright spark of her laughter, only the crackle of fire and the sickening thrill of loss. In the rare moments I tried to speak aloud, to Ma, to my sister, to the barn walls, I found that my voice had grown thin, as if the spring of my soul had run dry. I learned then what it means to feel truly alone, not just in body but in spirit, as if your very right to exist is up for debate. For a time, I lay in bed listening to the wind rattle the window screen and wondered whether the world would notice if I didn't rise again at dawn. But life insisted on its own rhythm, and eventually I moved on, not by choice but by necessity. I took up small tasks, repairing the barn door, painting the porch swing, helping unsteady neighbors with their groceries, and though my heart felt like stone, I discovered that work could be a kind of prayer, each hammer strike a syllable uttered into the void. People began to greet me again at the general store, offering polite nods as though I had never broken, and I realized how easily the world could forget your pain if you didn't advertise it. My faith in myself wavered. I questioned whether I was anything more than the sum of my mistakes and the scars left behind. My faith in others dimmed. I wondered if kindness was ever more than a passing fancy, discarded when it grew inconvenient. And my faith in life itself felt fragile, like a single candle flickering against a storm. Still, in the quiet hush of those days, I began to collect small affirmations, the way the sunrise still held a trace of gold, the dog's tail beating a gentle rhythm against the floor, Ma's unheard sigh when she thought I was asleep. I realized that although the pain had hollowed me out, it had also opened a space for something new, something that might grow slowly, like spring wildflowers pushing through frost. I didn't know if I'd ever be the same boy who believed in happy endings, but I saw that survival wasn't about forgetting, nor about forcing a false joy. It was about tending the wounds, tending the days, and trusting that even the coldest silence could, in time, give way to a fragile, tremulous hope. Well now, there was a morning when I woke up and the weight on my chest felt lighter, though I couldn't have told you why right away. I just knew my old bones didn't ache as much, and the sunrise, for the first time in months, seemed to reach out and brush my face like an old friend. I shuffled into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and noticed that Ma's rosebush by the window had stubbornly pushed out a single pale pink bloom, even though I hadn't tended it in weeks. I stood there, mug in hand, staring at that delicate petal, wondering how something so soft could prise its way through thorn and drought, and it struck me then that maybe I could too. Later that day, I found myself walking down the dusty lane toward old Mr. Henderson's place. He lived 3 farms over, and rumors said he'd taken a nasty spill off his tractor. I didn't know if he needed help, but I knew I needed purpose. I climbed a fence and called out, and when he hobbled into view, his face drawn tight with pain, I offered to fetch his medicine from town. He looked at me, puzzled, as if he hadn't seen me since I was that scrawny boy scribbling stories under the porch swing, and he managed a crooked grin that felt like sunlight cutting through a storm cloud. "Well, I'll be," he said, his voice gravelly. "I can't pay you much, but pull up a chair if you're fixing to rest." We sat on his creaky rocker, sun warming our backs, and he told me stories of his own hard years, how he lost his wife to pneumonia in '49, and how the farm nearly broke him before he learned to lean on friends. I listened, really listened, for the first time in a long while, and I realized that kindness wasn't a transaction, but a lifeline. That afternoon, I made it my business to visit him every chance I got, swinging by with a jar of homemade jam or repairing the broken screen on his porch. Each small task felt like a stitch in a new quilt I was sewing from my heart, and I found myself humming old country tunes on the way back home, a tune I hadn't heard in years. That evening, as I sat on the front steps, I pulled my journal from my coat pocket, dusty, dog-eared, but still mine, and wrote a single line. "Kindness gives more than it takes." I paused, took a slow sip of lemonade, and felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost long ago. Hope, maybe, or the faint glow of purpose. In the days that followed, that spark grew quietly. I started teaching little Jimmy across the road how to read, picking up the first-grade primer my sister had kept tucked away, and watching his eyes light up when he sounded out cat, made me realize that sharing stories could mend more than fences. I fixed the broken steps at church, repainted the faded sign at the general store, and even coaxed Ma into baking her famous apple pie again, her first in ages, and the smell drifting through the house was like a promise of better days. It wasn't some grand revelation, no white horse or trumpet fanfare, but a series of gentle nudges, a rosebud in winter, a neighbor's thanks, a boy's delighted grin, and with each small victory, the hollow space inside me felt a little less echoing. I found myself looking forward to the mornings, eager to see what I might do next, and when I stumbled or felt afraid, I remembered that bloom on Ma's rosebush, pushing through hardships simply to exist. I reckon this new impulse won't blaze like a wildfire. It's more like the steady glow of a lamp you keep burning through the night so you don't lose your way. But that light is enough to guide me, enough to remind me that even in the aftermath of sorrow, there's always room for another chance, another small beginning, another moment to choose life over despair. And isn't that what survival's all about? I stood on the edge of the old barnyard one evening, the sun slipping below the horizon like time itself retreating, and I held that tattered notebook in my hands, the one I'd carried since childhood, pages worn thin by tears and fear. For years it had been my vault of hurt, the place where every cutting word and every silent look was etched in ink, but now it felt like a chain I'd been dragging behind me. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of each memory press into my heart one last time. I remembered the voice of my pa telling me I was worthless, the hush in my ma's kitchen when I dared to ask for kindness, the cruel laughter of my uncle echoing in that dusty hall. Those were the echoes I'd carried, long after the walls that held them had crumbled. I opened the cover and flipped through the pages, each word a sharpened shard of the past. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something stronger, hope. I realized that these words, once my refuge, had become my prison, and so I made my choice. I let the notebook fall to the ground, its pages fluttering like wounded birds in the dying light. I could almost hear them whisper, begging me to remember. but I had decided their time was over. With one long breath, I gathered the pages into a pile and set them aflame. The flames licked the ink until it curled into smoke that rose into the twilight sky, carrying with it the sorrow that had rooted itself in my bones. As I watched the ashes drift, a strange calm settled over me, as though the world had exhaled alongside me. In that moment, I was no longer the boy who trembled at every harsh word, nor the man who hid behind silent sorrow. I was simply a soul choosing to live beyond the shadows. The smoke swirled above the fields, and I felt my chest unclench, as if the act of letting go had created space inside me for something new. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't a gift for those who wronged me. It was a gift I gave myself, a turning of the tide in my own favor. I didn't need to forget what had happened, but I could decide that it would not define the man I would become. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the world still hushed and expectant, and I walked down to the creek I'd once fled to in despair. The water shimmered in the first light, carrying the reflection of a sky-washed clay. I knelt at the edge and dipped my fingers into the cold current, letting it wash away the last residue of grief that clung to my skin. I whispered to the rushing stream, I choose to live, without bitterness, without regret, just forward. And when I stood, the weight on my shoulders had lifted enough to let me stretch my arms wide, as if I were greeting a new day and a new self with open wings. That day, I returned to the farmhouse and found Ma tending her rosebush, her hands gentle and sure. She looked up, surprised, and we shared a quiet nod that said more than words ever could. My sister brought out the primer for little Jimmy, and together we sat on the porch steps, reading each line aloud, her voice steady, my voice clear. I realized then that life would always hold sorrow, but it would also hold these moments of connection, small acts of kindness that stitch the torn fabric of our hearts back together. I buried the ashes of my notebook at the foot of Ma's rosebush, planting a seed of remembrance that would feed new blooms each spring. And every time I pass by that spot, I'm reminded that the past is a chapter, not the whole story, that I have the power to write the pages that follow. I chose to live on. I chose to let my scars be proof of survival, not trophies of pain. And in that choice, I discovered the deepest freedom a man can know, the freedom to be more than what was done to him. I've spent a lifetime listening to the wind rustle through those Kansas cornfields, and in all those years I've come to understand this simple truth. The people who hurt us most often teach us the hardest lessons, and those lessons, painful as they are, can become the bedrock of our strength if we let them. Back in the day, I carried my wounds like a badge of shame, convinced that my value was measured by the cold words of a father or the silence of a mother. But I've learned that what truly defines a man isn't who scolded him or who turned away. It's who he chooses to be after the storm is past. I look around now at a world where kindness can be as scarce as rain in a dry spell, and I feel compelled to tell you that waiting for someone else's permission to heal is like waiting for snow in July. You'll be waiting a long, long time. Instead, take that first, trembling step toward yourself, plant a seed of forgiveness, even if it's just for the sake of unburdening your own heart. I buried the ashes of my old notebook beneath a rosebush that blooms each spring, and each petal reminds me that beauty can grow from the darkest soil. You might think that forgiving means forgetting, but I found that true forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it simply frees you from its grasp, and in that freedom, you reclaim the power to build something new. If there's one piece of wisdom I can pass along, it's this: scars aren't signs of weakness, they're proof that you survived. And in that survival, you'll discover an unexpected gift, empathy, the ability to stand beside someone else in their pain and say, I've been there, too. So maybe it's time to stop waiting for the world to change and start changing the world you carry inside. Perhaps that means reaching out to a neighbor, sharing your story with a friend, or simply looking in the mirror each morning and saying, I'm worthy of love, even if it feels like the bravest thing you've ever done. Because when you do, you'll find that the echoes of your past grow quieter, and the voice of your own courage grows louder, guiding you toward a life not defined by what was done to you, but by what you dare to do next. I've walked with you through 70 years of memories, through the hush of a farmhouse dawn, the sting of broken promises, the flicker of hope in a girl's smile, and the quiet decision to rise again from the ashes of my own pain. And as we come to the end of this journey, I want you to feel something simple yet profound, that you are not alone in your struggles, and that the stories you carry in your heart matter today just as much as they did when they were first written in the dust of that Kansas floor. I'm not here to hand you a tidy moral or pat you on the back with empty platitudes. I'm here to sit beside you on this old porch, to offer you a warm cup of understanding, and to remind you that sometimes the greatest strength we can muster is the courage to keep feeling, even when the wounds still ache. This story isn't just a glimpse into days long gone, it's a mirror for the moments you face now, the quiet regrets, the small victories, the gentle kindnesses you might overlook, and the scars that prove you have survived. So tell me, friend, what do you carry with you that's begging to be laid to rest? What ember of hope flickers dimly inside you, waiting for a breath of kindness to set it ablaze? And, if I may ask one more question, do you think true love should find its way back to us, even after years of silence and sorrow? I sometimes catch myself imagining Elsie's laughter drifting back on the breeze, as if she still wanders these fields in search of the boy who learned to believe in himself by believing in her words. Perhaps she remembers, perhaps she doesn't, but that question lingers in my mind like a soft refrain. Can what once was lost ever truly be found again? I invite you to ponder that tonight, beneath whatever sky is above you, and if you're so inclined, leave your answer in the comments below, because your voice, too, deserves to be heard, and your story, too, deserves a witness. And though this chapter closes, the pages of your life remain wide open, waiting for you to write the lines of compassion, resilience, and love that will define the next act. May you find in your own memories the courage to let go of what weighs you down, the grace to embrace what lifts you up, and the quiet confidence to know that, no matter what happened then, you have the power to shape what happens now. Thank you for sitting with me in this twilight hour. I'll leave you with the gentle thought that sometimes, in the stillness between moments, you might just feel a whisper on the wind, as if someone you loved long ago is saying, "I remember you."